Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Today from the NewDEAL Forum Ideas Summit in Atlanta, we talked to Georgia State Representative Sam Park. He's the son of Korean immigrants. He's the first openly gay man to be elected to the Georgia House. And we talk about that journey, his effort to fight for health care after his mom got stage 4 cancer, how he advocates in the minority, and how he keeps hope in these difficult times. He's an incredible leader. He's on the ground of the fight for American democracy. Enjoy. Georgia Representative Sam Park, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
We are in your home state as we speak at the NewDEAL Forum Ideas Summit. Looking forward to gathering of the leaders. I want to start by talking about you and your experience in the Georgia Legislature, Georgia politics.
Sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and all the barriers you're breaking down, right?
Sure, absolutely. So I am a Georgia native, born and raised, though I may not look it. I grew up, a son of a single mother, a low-income immigrant, and never really viewed politics as something that I would be involved with. It felt very distant and something inaccessible. In law school, I took a health legislative advocacy course where I had my first foray into state politics and really fell in love with the legislative process. A few years afterwards, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it was that fight, that her battle against cancer, that ultimately inspired me to take a leap of faith and to run for office. It was Medicaid and Medicare that had given her a fighting chance. And, that same year, the same year that my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, was the same year that the majority party here in Georgia decided to block Medicaid expansion. In fact, they, passed legislation to take away the power from the governor to make a unilateral decision to require approval from a majority of both the House and the Senate. I found that to be unconscionable, certainly in seeing the personal effects that Medicaid has on people's lives. And so that's ultimately what compelled me to run for office. I was kind of a dark horse, to say the least. I was running in a leaning Republican district in 2016. No one had ever challenged the Republican the year prior, or the election cycle prior to myself running. But I did see a path forward. The district had changed significantly. I saw a new American majority within the district, and so I felt compelled, given the hardship that my mother faced, and felt compelled to run for office to make sure that all Georgians have access to affordable quality health care.
Tell us for potential other dark horse candidates out there, people who are never saw themselves in elected office. When they look at who gets elected, they don't see themselves reflected back.
Yes.
What's your advice for entering and running a campaign that ultimately gets you into those spaces?
For me, the first thing that's critically important is knowing your why. For me, I was asked the question by my pastor, what breaks your heart? Know what that is, and then do something about it. For me, in the midst of that hardship and seeing my mother, battle cancer, taking her to her chemotherapy appointments, and then also seeing her medical expenses come, in which, again, Medicare and Medicaid covered 100%. And then also recognizing that there were hundreds of thousands of Georgians, my fellow neighbors, who didn't have the same fighting opportunity. That ultimately became my why as to why I felt I needed to just even share my mother's story, to recognize and find common ground with folks from different backgrounds and experiences of this is just a human right when all is said and done, especially when we have the capacity to provide life-saving care. Why aren't we doing more to ensure that all Georgians, all Americans have that sort of access to care? When I first began my foray in on the campaign trail, that was a unique experience for me. I never really run for anything at all. But for me, I kind of, brought it down to the basics. Which was just talking, having a conversation, going door to door. I recall, the first door that I knocked on, and when someone opened it up, I froze because I just didn't know what to say, and we ended up having a great conversation. He thanked me profusely because he had lived in the area for 10, 20 years and no one had ever asked him for his vote. And that kind of began, my campaign journey, in which my team and we knocked tens of thousands of doors. I shared that same story of why I was running for office. And after I shared my motivation, my reason for being there at their door asking for their vote, I asked, what do you care about? And that led into a great conversation in which I felt like I really had the opportunity to, one, build trust by simply being present and asking what voters wanted, and then two, getting a better understanding of what the district needed, in which I represent a very diverse district, but when all is said and done, there was a lot of common ground. People wanted safe communities, they wanted good schools, good jobs. And ultimately, that helped formulate my campaign message, though it was, again, my personal motivation and the why of healthcare that I think was able to get me across the finish line.
What do you think the Democratic Party needs to learn from you, both in terms of recruiting candidates and non-traditional candidates, or people who haven't run for office before, and then also being able to win in swing districts and swing states?
Yeah, I think especially in this moment, as Democrats, we have to anchor ourselves in fundamental American principles and values. Democrats, in my opinion, we are the party of the Constitution. We are the party of American democracy, and certainly in the South, we are also carrying and the torch of civil rights and human rights. With Georgia being the crucible and the birthplace of Dr. King. But what does that look like specifically, right? For me, we're talking freedom, equality, justice for all, right? Fundamental American values which apply to specific issues. What then does that look like, right? When we're talking about healthcare, right? Freedom to live your life to the best of your ability certainly should include the ability to have access to quality, affordable healthcare. Right. When we're talking about equality, let's look at education as the great equalizer, in which just because private school and private tuition should not be a barrier to receiving world-class education, which is why Democrats are so fundamentally opposed to this voucher school scam that has cost states billions of dollars without any meaningful improvement in student outcomes. And of course, it also leaves a lot of students out of the loop, exacerbating this sort of tiered class system based on education. When we're looking at justice, Georgia still has a very, very long ways to go, given its dark history that we've inherited with respect to economic justice, with respect to the inequities that we see in so many different facets of our people's lives, not just only as to income and wealth, but also in terms of health outcomes, social mobility, economic mobility. And so, I think, especially, from an immigrant perspective, immigrants come to this country by putting America on a pedestal, right? What does the pursuit of the American dream like today? And again, I think, viewing and acting on those principles as applied to specific policy, I think is an important anchor to make sure that people know that Democrats today, we are the guardians of American democracy that's trying to ensure that this country lives up to its full promise.
You are the whip in the Georgia Legislature.
Mhm.
It's your job to coordinate the policies for the Democrats, but then also recruit good candidates and eventually get to be in the majority. That is important not only for the people of Georgia, but frankly, Georgia is a key state for the whole country.
Yes.
How are things looking politically in Georgia right now?
I'm bullish
Okay.
with respect to Georgia politics. Georgia today is a majority minority state, but that is not reflected in our state government at all. If you go down to the state capitol, you'll see essentially older rural folks kind of controlling everything. Georgia is the eighth largest state by population. We passed a $36 billion budget earlier this year. We are a growing and prosperous state, but yet so many people still are left out of the wealth, out of the opportunity that the state could otherwise provide. Um, and so, with respect to, for example, candidate recruitment, I think again, I want to see people who are grounded in service, who recognize that this work is more than just about climbing the ladder, but a matter of, again, building a democracy that's more reflective of all of us.
And what do policies look like when you get that majority? I mean, obviously, Medicaid expansion would be, I would imagine, at the top of your list,
Yeah.
given your personal experience and passion for it. What other policies do you think could differentiate the Democratic Party from the Republicans once you get
Yeah.
control?
I've been in the Georgia House for 9 years now, and essentially I've been fighting for the same thing for the past 9 years. And so this whole notion that anyone who is to the left of where Republicans are today, that they are communists, I think is the most ridiculous notion imaginable. What have I been fighting for the past 9 years? What have my Democratic colleagues in the Georgia House been fighting for? One, access to health care. Two, fully funding public education, where after the 2008 Great Recession, Republicans defunded public education by almost $1 billion, K through 12 education by up to $1 billion. And of course, most recently, they are defunding their rural school districts with this private school voucher scam. Three, economic security. For many, many years, I've worked on introducing a state level earned income tax credit, one of the most effective anti-poverty measures that incentivizes people to work harder and to make more money. On the economic front, of course, we also have to work on expanding access to affordable housing. We passed some good bipartisan legislation this year to reduce the impact of private equity purchasing, so many affordable homes in Georgia and increasing the price. From a long-term perspective, especially as we're, in this AI revolution, on the tailwinds of this information revolution, energy is another critical aspect that I've been focused on as well. This year, I introduced two state-level tax credits that would help accelerate the production and investment of clean energy sources, modeled after federal tax provisions. But I think first and foremost, I think, at least in my mind, I certainly have a comprehensive legislative agenda that I would want to see move forward. But first and foremost, beyond above everything, I think we have to ensure that voters have a seat at the table with respect to our democracy. Right. I think democracy reform, especially in a place like Georgia, where we no longer have the protections of pre-clearance with respect to redistricting, right, is so important. So one, making sure that every Georgian, every citizen has a right to vote without issue. Two, that we are taking money out of politics. The majority party a few years ago, they passed these leadership committees that essentially allow you to raise and spend unlimited amounts of money in coordination with candidates, right? It's created a flood of money into state politics in the state. And then third, independent redistricting reform. 2020 was the first year since 1965, in which Georgia could draw its maps for Congress, the state Senate, and the state House without first going through the Department of Justice or first getting those maps pre-cleared. What did the majority party engage in? Well, they engaged in racial gerrymandering. Congressional, state Senate, state House maps were all struck down by a federal court, requiring the state to redraw those maps. What then did they engage in? Partisan gerrymandering. And again, that's why essentially, it's my view that we have an unrepresentative state government that is not listening to voters who, in Georgia, there is bipartisan support for full Medicaid expansion, for healthcare. There is bipartisan support for investing in public education from cradle to career. There is bipartisan support for conservation and for being smart with respect to growth. But again, what we're seeing, unfortunately, right now is folks trying to outright each other in preparation for running for higher office, which is unfortunate.
How do you, I mean, one is how do you keep hopeful? Two, how do you win in a game where the rules are being rigged against you, especially in terms of democracy, right? Like I think gerrymandering distorts power in voting, and then you're trying to use those systems that have been distorted
Yeah.
to win it back. So like, so A, what keeps you going? B, what do you do to win back, to just level the playing field
Yeah.
again?
What gives a source of inspiration for my hope and resilience, I think, is just the legacy that we've inherited. Certainly the rich and powerful legacy of civil rights in the state of Georgia, in which, I serve with members in the Georgia House today, who were born in segregation, who lived through integration, and have told me repeatedly that we have made progress. I think in recognizing and seeing that pass in many different facets, certainly from my African American colleagues, but also with respect to the progress made in the LGBTQ community. Carla Drenner comes to mind, the first out member of the Georgia House who was elected 17 years ago, in which she was blatantly discriminated by members of the House, right? Folks wouldn't ride in the elevator with her because they were scared that they were going to, catch a disease. Um, you know, Having an opportunity to stand on their shoulders, to see their resilience and ability to still make progress in the face of overwhelming odds. I think for me is a reminder that so long as we remain in this system, the system in and of itself is one of progress. The American story, I think, for me, by and large, is one of progress, in which, yes, there are instances in which we have had to take a few steps backwards, certainly, like the moment that we are in today. But overall, I think we have continued to move forward and expanding our freedoms for all Americans and ensuring equal opportunity and taking an equitable lens and understanding that some folks, as a matter of historical legacy, have been left behind. Right? How do we ensure justice for all? How do we ensure safe communities for all? I still, without a doubt, to the core of my being, believe that we have an opportunity to still make progress. And certainly that hope is one of the things that continues to drive me, despite how difficult it may be in the Georgia House at times.
You importantly but modestly gave a lot of other people credit for being groundbreaking
Hmm.
and fighting for civil rights. You yourself are the first openly gay man to serve in the Georgia Legislature. Can you talk about that experience, both during the campaign and then now in the legislature itself?
Sure. So in 2016, that was the year that the Republican majority passed religious liberty legislation that ended up being vetoed by a Republican governor. To be running for the first time for office in an environment in which, my future colleagues discriminated, voted for legislation that would discriminate or permit state-sanctioned discrimination against someone like myself and my community was certainly very difficult and very, very challenging. But yeah, at the same time, when I'm talking to voters, like they didn't care. Again, what voters in my district, and I represent a suburban district about 30 minutes northeast of Atlanta, in Gwinnett County, the most diverse county in the state of Georgia, one of the most diverse counties in Georgia, and also a political epicenter, given that we've seen significant political changes driven in part by demographic changes. But for the most part, people, again, they cared about common sense issues that impacted their daily lives. They wanted good jobs, safe communities, good schools. They could care less what my sexual orientation was. They could care less about these manufactured culture wars regarding, transgender this and transgender that. That's just, mudslinging and politicking in the worst sense in their minds. So for me, you know, it was interesting because, I have that intersectional identity, um, in which, folks, if they first meet me, like they may not realize that I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, but you can certainly recognize that I'm Asian American, right?
Right.
And so, breaking that Asian American barrier, I think, ended up being a little more significant in part, because I was the first Asian American Democrat, the second only who had ever been elected to the state legislature, back 2016, so 9 years ago. Today, one of the things I'm so proud of is that we have one of the largest Asian American legislative caucuses in the country with 11 members. Yes, and I would say that that's not necessarily, my doing itself, but I do think in breaking that first barrier, right, and it's a reminder and a demonstration that I think a lot of other Asian American communities recognize and saw of we can do this too, right? State government and participating and having a real seat at the table is something that we can do too. And so, we don't see a lot of, it's not a collection or a group of Korean American or one ethnic Asian American group that's dominating the legislature right now in Georgia. You have myself and one other Republican as representing the Korean American community, but we have representation from the Chinese American community, Vietnamese community, Filipino community, Bangladeshi community. It's a very diverse group of Asian American legislators that represents the diversity of the Asian American community here in Georgia. And so seeing that, I think, again, is a reminder that American democracy is alive and well. We just have to lean in and be very intentional with participating in it.
You make a convincing case that the United States is moving as the moral arc of the universe towards justice, even though it feels like we're going back at times. It feels like we're slipping more than a couple steps back right now with attacks both on democracy and on civil rights from the federal administration. Can you talk about a little bit about how it feels different now being in a red state, trying to move priorities and represent communities in this Trump-based environment?
Sure. So, first I'd say, what the Trump administration doing is in many ways unprecedented. Certainly the scope and scale of what they're trying to do. At the same time, I've been in the minority party in a state like Georgia for the past 9 years, in which it often feels and has felt like we've been in this sort of environment for the past 9 years, one that is somewhat autocratic, one that is intentionally trying to undermine the power of the people to have real democratic representation. Certainly, again, to the pieces of making it more difficult to vote, having partisan or racial gerrymander districts that don't reflect the will of the people. And so I think, first and foremost, in the minority party, it's been a matter of mitigating as much harm as we can. I think we're seeing that at the federal level with respect to a lot of the lawsuits and the litigation that's enjoining some of these blatantly unconstitutional executive orders. I am certainly very, very concerned as to the damage and harm that Trump is causing to the United States on the global stage, including, for example, the dollar and the bond market, where it seems like a lot of countries are beginning to lose confidence in the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. The attacks against USAID, I thought was absolutely egregious, and again, has ultimately the effect of accelerating American decline, in which we're seeing this massive gap, in which who then is filling it? It is our competitors. It is China. It is others, filling a fundamental need around the world and giving them an opportunity to build soft power to the detriment of the United States and the West. And so while there isn't necessarily a comparable there at the state level, I think navigating a very difficult environment, certainly there are parallels there in which there are ways to, I think, find and make success. One, again, being mitigating harm, but two, trying to build bipartisan coalitions, either to move something forward or to block something altogether. It's certainly a tact that we've used in the minority party here in Georgia for many, many years now. What that looks like at the federal level, we'll see. One of the things I do often tell my colleagues is, it's Georgia being a part-time legislature, running out the clock is a key strategy. right? And so in a similar way, I think running out the clock to the Trump administration's first half of his second term, I think is critically important as well, right? Mitigate as much harm as possible. And hopefully we'll get to the next midterms, in which case we elect a new Congress that actually functions as the Constitution requires it to, as a check and a balance to an executive that has clearly gone off the rails.
In my last question, really, for someone listening out there or watching, and they're from a marginalized community, they don't see themselves represented. Maybe even if they're lucky enough to get elected, they're going to be in the minority party and not able to move an agenda. Like, what's your message for? You're a talented attorney. You could be making lots of money. You could be having a much easier life. What's your pitch for taking the harder path?
Yeah. I'd say, we all have one life to live. You have to live it to the best of your ability. For me, that means to do as much good as I can with the opportunities that have been provided to me. I think, especially in this political environment, we need more people to step up, to lean in, and to, carry on the fight. This is a moment in which we all have to fight for our country in terms of what our country is and what it should be. I do think, unfortunately, that things will likely get worse before it gets better. But I think therein lies an opportunity in which people who just care about their neighbors, about their family members, about their communities, who want to see this country succeed and thrive, I think this is the moment in which, again, we have to lean in, find common ground, even with people that we may disagree with, to restore what it means to be an American and what America should stand for.
I appreciate that. We appreciate having you as part of New Deal and joining us on this podcast today. We look forward to seeing you emerge in the majority in Georgia and then driving some of that legislation that would impact people like your mom and so many Georgians. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.